back, everybody, to the 2020 Taxation is Theft Fest. I am Dre, your host for this next coming segment for the next few guests. Let's welcome Dave Champion. Dave is going to be talking with us about Shattering the Myths, how the IRS is ripping you off. Dave is the author of the best-selling, most authoritative book in America, Revealing the Truth of Income Tax. Dave was born and raised in the San Fernando Valley in California. Let's welcome Dave to the show.
Thank you, Dre. How are you today?
Hi, how are you?
I'm spectacular, thank you. And thanks for having me today.
Absolutely. So, what do you have for us today?
I'm pretty sure that Daniel wanted us to have a conversation about the truth of the income tax, because of course, one of Daniel's macro themes is taxation is theft. And while I probably deviate from that perspective a little bit, because I do believe that if we are to have some sort of a community activities need to be funded at some level somehow. So having said that, my area of expertise is who Congress has actually imposed the income tax upon and who Congress has not imposed the income tax upon. And I say that to draw a stark distinction between the two, because the vast majority of Americans have never read a single word of tax law in their lives, not a word. And yet they believe, emphasis on believe, that they are a person upon whom Congress has imposed the income tax, when in reality, the number of Americans upon whom Congress has imposed the income tax is almost assuredly less than 3% of the population. And that imposition of the tax on them is based on activities they're involved in, which do not include getting up in the morning and earning a living.
So what would those be? What would be a couple of examples of those?
Okay, so when we look at the income tax, and by the way, I should say when we look at the income tax, in order to look at it completely, we have to begin back in 1895 with the Pollock ruling, and then we come all the way forward through 1913 when they enacted what we know now as the Internal Revenue Code, and then all the laws and the statutes and the regs and the Treasury orders and Treasury decisions and so forth all the way through. That's what I mean when I say we need to look at what the tax laws say. And the bottom line is, cutting to the chase, that Congress has imposed the income tax on just three classes of persons. And one is U.S. citizens residing abroad with foreign earned income. The second category is foreign corporations with U.S. source income. And the third category is foreign individuals deriving U.S. source income. The only codicil to this, and this is the equation where I was saying the less than 3% part, is that Congress has made certain Americans liable for, in other words, they have to pay the tax, that the non-resident alien owes on his U.S. source income. And to quickly address that, if, let's say, I'm a stock brokerage firm and somebody from Brazil has a stock trading account, then what I have to do, I collect the payments from the companies in which the stocks are invested. I look at the total of the dividends. When I go to pay it out to the Brazilian fellow in Brazil, tax law requires me as the last, we'll just call it American, the law is a bit more specific, but as the last American with it, Congress says I have to withhold the income tax from the U.S. source income being paid over to the Brazilian cat, because once the money went to him, he's in Brazil. Why would he bother to pay? So that is the tiny, tiny, tiny part of the American population that is made liable for the income tax.
Well, that doesn't quite seem fair, does it? Considering there's so many of us.
Right. And it's funny because you've probably heard time and again that the income tax is unconstitutional. And that is 100% false. It is totally constitutional. When people say it's unconstitutional, what they really mean is it's unconstitutional to be applied to me, or it's unconstitutional applied to all these people I see when I go out and I go to the movies and I go to restaurants. All these people, they don't owe income tax because it's unconstitutional. Well, it's totally constitutional. The only reason that those people pay the income tax is out of ignorance. And Daniel has a copy of my book, Income Tax: Shattering the Myths. And it's been out for more than a decade now, almost 11 years. It has received, and this is an absolute factual statement, it has received 100% positive reviews over almost 11 years. Who can say that in the internet age? Right. And the reason for that is because once somebody reads Income Tax: Shattering the Myths, there's no way to unknow what you discover. And I would say the predominant emotion people have when they're done with Income Tax: Shattering the Myths is anger, because they realize that the federal government has been scamming the public all along, because everything that's in the book is information provided from the government about the income tax. It's the government's internal documents that they were hoping people would never get their hands on, and I managed to get my hands on them. It's the Treasury orders that they've been publishing for 100 years. It's the Treasury decisions they've been publishing for 100 years. It's the actual language of the statute that nobody bothers to read. So it's all there. It all presents the same exact message, which is what I started with by describing upon whom the tax has been imposed. It all contains the same exact message. All you have to do is break it down into its constituent parts, as I've done in Income Tax: Shattering the Myths, and read it. I was naive when I wrote it, because my thinking was, if somebody takes all of this information, it took me from the day I started researching it until the day I wrote that book was 17 years. Okay. So my thinking was, okay, if people have to go through what I've gone through, and they have to invest this amount of time, and I had some ugly encounters with the IRS in the early days before I knew the truth and what I was doing and all of the detail and all that. If everybody has to follow that path, I mean, no one's ever going to learn the truth, because no one wants to go through that. So I'm going to write this book, and I'm going to put all the law, all the facts, all the history in this one compendium that anyone can read. And when they're done with 400 pages, they know the truth, and they can never unknow the truth. So I was under the impression that if somebody created that sort of compendium, that resource, man, this would take off like wildfire. Every American would want to know. And I was wrong. Most Americans don't want to know. So that's where we are today.
That is the sad truth of it. When you get into this liberty movement, whether it's in this leg of it or that, there's a lot of people that do not want to see the truth, do not want to know just how free they really can be. And that is sad when you realize that. But, I think that there's plenty of people out there that would love to know how they can reduce government encroachment in their life, and especially in this way. Who doesn't want to keep more of their own hard-earned money? So, it looks like Dave's coming back. Hey.
Yes, there we are. So why is it, we'll give your audience who has not read Income Tax: Shattering the Myths, we'll give your audience a quick overview. Why is it that Americans, which includes tax professionals, by the way, I've had attorneys read Income Tax: Shattering the Myths, and they say, we totally agree with everything that's in there and its conclusions. We would just be very uncomfortable taking this before a judge because it's so adverse to how the law has always been looked at. So the point is, if we're looking to the courts for this, we're looking in the wrong direction. And the American people need to learn the truth. I should say also, I have not filed an income tax return or paid a penny of income tax in 27 years. I am extremely vocal. I am, of course, the author of Income Tax: Shattering the Myths. I do radio shows, internet shows, and television shows all across the country talking about this topic. And here I am, free, breathing free air. So I say that to make the point to the audience that they don't have to fear going to jail. Have people gone to jail? Yes, they have. They have all been using kooky or invalid legal arguments. So Wesley Snipes is a perfect example. He was using something called the 861 argument, and off to prison he went. The reality is that, again, income tax shattering the myths has been around for 11 years, and the information shared in that book has been around for a lot longer than that. Anybody who's actually relied on the law, such as myself, the government just lets you walk away. But you have to know what the law says and be obedient to the law, which is super, super simple to do. So why are people confused, including these tax professionals? Okay, so the income tax essentially has 3 chapters. And the first 2 chapters are what I refer to as the rules of computation. If this situation exists, in this situation exists, then it's modified by that circumstance and so forth. This is how the equation works out. Okay? But what chapters 1 and 2 never discuss is actually who the tax is imposed upon, right? That's why I refer to them as the rules of computation, because chapters 1 and 2, if you want to know how to correctly figure your taxes on a tax return, that's where you go to look, chapters 1 and 2. Chapter 3 is entitled Tax on Non-Resident Aliens and Foreign Corporations. So you can imagine, it doesn't matter whether you're Joe Sixpack or somebody who has an accounting degree. They get to chapter 3 and they see, oh, this is the tax on non-resident. And they immediately tune out. They're like, well, that's not me. Right? It's not you. But chapter 3, the income tax upon non-resident aliens and foreign corporations, chapter 3 is where we find, I would say Congress hid them, but it's actually the National Archives and Records Administration that codifies that. But that's where the law, where Congress says, this is the person upon whom it's imposed, and this is the other person upon whom it's imposed. That's all very clear, shockingly clear in chapter 3. You can't find any of that in chapters 1 and 2. Yet, the way the mind thinks, everybody focuses on chapters 1 and 2. When they get to chapter 3, because of its title, they say, okay, no reason for me to read that. That doesn't apply to me. Mm-hmm. So that's a very superficial explanation for the difficulty there is in getting people to actually look at the law. And of course, the tax code is voluminous. So, and people don't understand law. And I certainly appreciate all of those things. And somebody should not have to train themselves up to the standard of an attorney in order to determine whether or not they owe income tax. But sadly, that is the case if somebody wants to just go from not knowing anything to spending years and years and years and years doing the research. They need to actually educate themselves up to the standard of an attorney. That's another reason that I wrote Income Tax Shattering the Myths, because it's all laid out. I mean, it's law, but it's all laid out and formatted and explained in a way that every single person in America, I know guys that have had their junior high school students read it, and they said at the end, did you understand it? They were like, yeah, totally, Dad. It's not difficult to understand once all the pieces are laid out straight, and you can run right through and say, oh, I get it. So as the author, yeah, I want people to buy the book, and I make a few bucks on it, and that's a great thing. But the far more important aspect of this is that there are, according to the government, about 100 million people in America who file income tax returns. And the overwhelming majority of those, 97 million, 98 million, whatever the precise number is, Congress has never imposed it upon them, and they don't owe a single penny. So what you said, Dre, about people oftentimes don't want to understand how free they could be, it's a little shocking. And I agree. By the way, if you'd asked me, if you'd said that statement 25 years ago, I probably would have said, no, that's not true. Everybody wants to be free. Here we are in 2020, especially with what's going on now. And I have to look around and say very few people actually want to be free.
Right.
But my thinking is, if you're not going to get in trouble and you're not going to go to jail and you don't have to go to court and tangle with the IRS or all these things that intimidate people and that what causes them to go ahead and file income tax returns. If people understood by following the law, none of that happens. You will never hear from the government again, at least concerning taxation. And you can keep 100% of what's yours because Congress has never taxed your money. If people could grasp, and they've been so socialized, and this is really a disheartening part about it, that society on the whole has been so socialized to believe that X is true, when in fact X is a falsehood. And the only reason they don't know that is because they're unwilling to spend the time, which I understand in decades earlier, there was a lot of time involved, but now the time to read a 400-page book and say, I don't have to tangle with the government. I don't have to be in fear. I don't have to fight them. I don't have to worry about being audited. I don't ever have to file another tax return. I don't have to do any of that because I read a 400-page book and I know what the law says now, and I know how to safely walk away. I want those 97 or 98 million people who are anticipated to file every year. I want all of them to know they don't have to do that. And it's not a struggle. It's not a fight. You don't have to tangle with the government. The government will let you walk away once you know the law.
So, Raptor, do you want to put Ricky Morris's comment up there at 318? Thank you. Can you read that?
Once I get my Walmart readers on, yes.
All right. I figured
Okay.
we'd address some comments real quick. Okay. So,
Well, I get what Ricky's saying, and
There is a reason that the Income Tax and the Federal Reserve Act were both enacted by Congress in 1913. They are integrally related, and that's probably more far afield than we want to go today. But in reality, the Federal Reserve did not impose the income tax. Congress chose, the people's representatives chose to impose the income tax. The good news is, though, it hasn't been imposed on the vast majority of Americans. So people who are upset about what they consider to be the imposition of the income tax, from my perspective, knowing what I know, they need to just stop being upset and read a book. And that way they will never be upset. Well, they'll be upset that the scam is going, but they won't be upset in the sense that they are being taken advantage of. Most people, especially if they have they care about their country, they care about their community, what they end up being upset about in the long run is that the government is taking advantage of all these other people who won't take time to read a book. And if they remain, what was that Jefferson said? I'm paraphrasing, a people who wish to remain ignorant and free wish for something that has never been. That applies completely to the income tax. You can simply safely walk away, but you have to read a book. And it just blows my mind that out of the 332 million Americans, I mean, I've sold tens of thousands of copies, and that's a good thing. But the idea that I've only sold tens of thousands of copies in a nation of 332 million with almost 100 million filing income tax returns, or 100 million actually filing tax returns, the fact that I've only sold tens of thousands is disturbing. And it speaks to what you were saying, Dre, that if it takes just this much effort to be free, that's not worth it.
that's sad. Yeah.
Oh, I'll give you a parallel, though. This is not just with taxation. I wrote a book on human physiology called Body Science, right? And it is a groundbreaking work. It looks at physiology, human physiology, from a way that the mainstream medical world does not look at human physiology. And it's all buttressed with facts and all the science. And it marches you through, and it shows you what our bodies are genetically coded to do and not do. And it tracks down what we do to our bodies to create chronic disease. We voluntarily create chronic disease in our body. I wrote that book it came out in November of last year, and I would say from my perspective, it's a success. But it's applicable to 8 billion people living on the planet, right? So I look at how it could change the course of human history as far as chronic disease is concerned. And especially in Western society, we are in the worst health crisis the world has ever known. We have a higher percentage of our population, especially here in the US, with chronic disease than at any time in the history of the world. With technology advancing and medicine advancing, the health of the American people is continuing downward. And all somebody has to do is read body science, and it's like, oh, it's just like income tax, shattering the myths for the income tax. It's like, oh, I totally get it now. Now I know how to change directions. It's simple, it's easy, and I'll do. Obviously, nowhere near 8 billion people have purchased body science. So my point is, it seems that if a message is something that contradicts the establishment narrative, most people, even those that fancy themselves libertarian, if something is in conflict with the establishment narrative, most Americans don't want to know.
So we had a comment come up a minute ago, and this is something I was kind of wondering about myself. Withholding by employers is the elephant in the room. How do you get around that part of it? Because it's one thing to not file taxes or whatever, but it's another thing to get that money to begin with, you know, to get 100% of your pay from your employer. How do you get that?
Okay, that is one of the big obstacles. Let me start by saying that right off the bat. In order to address that, just a couple of months back, I released a document called the Withholding Handbook. And the Withholding Handbook is intended because even people who read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, not everybody's articulate, not everybody has instant recall, not everybody's been doing this for 25 years as I have. So I understand sometimes it can be intimidating to sit down in the room with a company accountant or the company CFO and say, I don't want you to withhold, and here's why. And it's not that it's just like, I want you to stop withholding. You don't have any legal authority to withhold, so knock it off. I understand that can be challenging for people to say. So I came out with the withholding guide, wish I had one here in front of me to show you. It's short, it's about 14 pages. And when somebody approaches their HR department or the payroll department or their CFO or whomever they're sitting across the desk from chatting, they can rely on this document and they can hand it to the people on the other side and say, look, you know, I don't pretend to be the absolute expert in this. I know what I'm talking about, but I'm not the absolute expert. But that information that I just handed you, that is written by the expert in America on this subject matter. And it's crystal clear, and there's nothing to dispute about it. So I'll tell you what, why don't you read that? We don't have to settle this today. Why don't you take time? Can we meet again in 10 days? Can you have read the 14 pages in 10 days? Yeah, okay. So great, let's get our calendars and let's make an appointment to sit down again in 10 days. There's very little that the employer has to say once they've read the handbook. It's either one of two things, and of course I've seen both outcomes. One is, we didn't know this, okay, we're going to stop withholding. The other is, they don't use this language, but it's the same message. We don't care what the law actually says, we're going to just continue violate. Now that we know what the law says, we're just going to continue violating the law and stealing your property. And there's some recourse that people where they can go from there. But I wanted to be clear that gentleman's comment that payroll withholding is an obstacle is absolutely true. Having said that, when I talk about having people far and wide across the country read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, that's because if you had CEOs reading it, CFOs reading it, COOs reading it, you had directors of payroll, you had people in the accounting department, all across the employment spectrum. If they read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, all of this would be over. The problem that we're having at this moment in time, and things have been steadily improving. Believe me, I've been doing this for, like I said, I haven't filed or paid in 27 years, so we'll call it about 30 years I've been at this. things have improved considerably for the person who knows the truth. And the reason for that is because of the internet primarily. The truth has had the opportunity to get out to more and more and more people. But the ultimate resource, and I'm not saying this because I wrote it, it just happens to be the case at this moment in time, the ultimate resource is Income Tax Shattering the Myths. It is what people often refer to as the Bible on the subject of who Congress has imposed the income tax and who it hasn't. So if somebody says, yeah, but, my answer is, yeah, read the book and then get a couple loaner copies and loan it out to everybody you can. And if you happen to work for a company where somebody's got a great attitude, give them a copy. Hey, read. I'm talking about somebody in the management structure. If they say, if you think they'll read the book, give them a copy of the book. Getting the facts into people's hands is the single best way to end this. And there are some people I know who've read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, and they have been amazing powerhouses of energy in spreading this message. They have made it their life's mission to make sure that more and more and more and more and more Americans know the truth. I wish there was more of those people, because I think people are so comfortable being slaves that it's really tough to, especially if there's any potential discomfort. Okay, that's probably discomfort, oddly enough, in my opinion, is the number one reason we're losing our freedom. People don't want to experience any form of discomfort. Okay? And whenever they tangle with the government, even if it's minimally, they consider that uncomfortable. So since they are comfortable having their money stolen by this false societal narrative about the income tax, they're comfortable with that. And the idea of doing what is right is uncomfortable. We have a problem.
Easier to roll over than to put a foot down. Jarius Martinez says, safe in the cage. Yep, Shane Lakey. So other than read the book and figure out how not to get your taxes taken out of your employer's check, do you have any other words of wisdom for everybody out there to decrease the amount of taxes that they pay, if any?
Not decrease the amount of taxes that they pay. If somebody is a person upon whom Congress has imposed the income tax, then my view is they should absolutely pay whatever the formula works out that they should pay. What is essential is for people to understand that, they make this much money total. I said that's their salary. And then they have to give this much away to the government. All of that should stay in their bank account. It doesn't belong to the government, it belongs to them. And that's not me hypothesizing or sharing some personal philosophy. That's exactly what the law says. And the only difference between somebody like me and somebody who doesn't understand that is reading a 400-page book. Now, may I share with your audience where they can get Income Tax Shattering the Myths and Body Science and the Withholding Guide? There is also, by the way, a W-9 guide there, and that was written expressly for people who own their own businesses, because they constantly get asked to fill out forms W-9, right? And once they read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, they know the form W-9 has nothing to do with ordinary business between two entities or two people in American society. So instead of having an argument, they can just, once again, instead of handing an employer the Withholding Guide, they hand somebody they're doing business with the W-9 guide. So all four of those are there: Income Tax Shattering the Myths, Body Science, the Withholding Guide, and the W-9 guide. All people have to do is go to Dr. Reality, all one word, drreality.news.
We've
they
got
go
that
there.
flowing across the bottom here.
Oh, thank you. That's awesome.
Of course.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess we had a question. What about property tax?
By that, I presume this doesn't mean business property tax. I presume the person is speaking of tax upon real property. Okay. So I get this question a lot. And rather than answering it philosophically, I think, because if we talk about it philosophically, we're not going to get anywhere because everybody's got an opinion.
Sure.
So I think the way we need to look at it is where the rubber meets the road, the practicality. And taxes upon real property have existed since before the United States existed. The Crown levied taxes upon real property, upon people who own large tracts of land back when the colonies were part of England. Then, after 1776, when we had independence, all of the founding fathers said, "This is the way it works. We have to fund government, and so we're going to take a certain amount from landholders every year, and that's going to pay for the common things that we do." Of course, there was very few common things back then, so the demand for revenue was nowhere near what it is today. So my point being in sharing that tiny history lesson is that no one is ever going to win the argument saying 300 years of precedent should be overturned today because I don't really own my land if I'm taxed. I'm like a forever renter, right? That's what how a lot of people characterize this. And I'm not saying I disagree philosophically. What I'm saying is you're not going to find a court anywhere in the land, a county court, a state court, a federal court, that's going to say, "Oh yeah, let's take this 300 years of precedent and throw it out the window because this guy says it's not right." Again, not arguing the morality of it, simply saying it's never going to happen. So why go there?
Never say never, Dave. I don't know.
If somebody wins that argument, I will be happy to come back here and eat crow and tell you I was completely wrong.
Like I honestly don't have the answer to that. I wish I did, but large tracts of land. There has to be a way around that because you have to be able to own your own home. I think it's crazy that you pay, however much a year on top of the price of your home for decades, and it's just never really your own. That just doesn't make sense,
Well, I guess it depends how people look at that. Depends on how libertarian minded they are versus how communally minded they are. What I mean by that is, for instance, oftentimes when I'm on a show like this talking about income tax, somebody will say, "Well, how do we fund the schools? How do we pay for the roads? How do we pay for any of the infrastructure locally?" And of course, none of that's paid for by income tax. So it's a red herring, but they're not really aware of that. What fire departments, police departments, and schools are predominantly paid from is taxes on real property within the community. So I understand there is for somebody who's very strongly libertarian and believes police should be privatized and fire departments should be privatized and there should be no government schools. And I understand that to get rid of property tax is very appealing. For somebody who's communally minded and they said, "No, I want there to be public schools to send my kids." When I hear glass break at 3:00 in the morning, I want the cops to show up when I call, and I don't want to bill for that. And I don't want competing police companies to end up in a firefight between themselves, trying to get my business. I don't want my house to burn down while the private fire companies are arguing about who's going to put the fire out, which is literally the truth of how it used to go down. The fire companies would literally, in the middle of the street, engage in violence against one another as the house burned down. Okay? Those activities, which very few people are really aware of today, those activities around the turn of the 20th century is why we have government-funded fire departments today. And of course, one can imagine we see all sorts of law enforcement abuse. And I'm not going to say that it would be better or worse, but if law enforcement was privatized, there would be a whole new direction from which corruption and abuse and illegal violence and so forth would be promulgated. So for people who are communally minded, the idea of doing away with property tax is not appealing. Very, very, very ultra-libertarian, it is appealing. Communally minded, not appealing. My assessment, for what it's worth, is it's a political dead letter, because I'm going to go out on a limb here and say 97, 98% of any community is going to say, I want a fire department when I call, and I want a police department when I call, and I want to send my kids to school, and I don't want these things privatized. So how do we get around that? I mean, I moved out of California 11 years ago, 12 years ago. Anyway, I moved out of California because Californians keep voting socialist, okay? And I realized the percentage of people who are voting socialism in California is constantly going up. Okay? And the number of people who have a more open, free market framework and don't want socialism, their numbers are remaining essentially the same, while the number of socialists keeps going up and up and up. And I finally came to the realization, I need to get out of here, because this is a fight I cannot win. It's like me standing in an alley trying to fight 30 guys. I'm not going to win that fight. That's how I see the property tax issue as well, because the vast majority of people like it just the way it is. You're not going to win it from a voting perspective. And I already addressed how I believe the courts would look at that. So, well, yes, you're right. I was wrong. Never say never. I'll say I don't see that as anything I would imagine is going to change anytime soon.
Just because everybody's stuck in a rut.
Yeah, well, I don't know if it's that or they think it's the right way. And again, I'm not taking a position on this. I'm just saying I think that's their point of view, that having local government in charge of schooling, having local government provide the cop that comes to your door at 2 a.m, having the local government put the fire out. I believe that they think that's exactly how the world should work. And no one has ever presented them with a practical working model for anything but that. So it's really hard to change people's mind when they have one model. They believe that model is correct, and there has been no alternative model provided in a practical manner. We can talk about it theoretically, but actually, like, making it work in practice, there's very, very few examples. So I kind of excoriate people who don't want to get educated, but when there's no other model to educate from, I kind of let them off the hook a little bit. I don't know if that makes sense.
You know, it's difficult when people are set in their mind one way, but like you said, you know, you don't think that judges would rule against it. However, if we got enough people into a libertarian mindset in regards to taxes, whether it be income tax or property tax or estate tax, for crying out loud, you know,
Right.
to get you coming and going, I think that we could push the needle in a lot of these ways. It's just going to take the time and the effort to make people see it, and it's going to be uncomfortable freedom. And I think a lot of people are okay with that. And I think that if they are willing, like you are, to educate the masses to get comfortable with uncomfortable freedom, that they might get more comfortable with it.
I would love to see people become more what I refer to as libertarian minded. You know, I understand we've taken a long time to get where we are today, which is not where I think we should be. So I'm not looking for an instant overnight solution, but I would sure like to see things start to swing back in the other direction. And I've got to admit, I'm not seeing a lot of that. You're doing a great job here. Daniel does a great job. I'm doing my part. But here's an interesting take. Oh, by the way, you mentioned like gift and estate tax. Okay. By the way, those are linked in the tax code. Gift tax, estate tax, taxes on gambling winnings. This should get some people's attention. All of those have been imposed on the same class as the income tax. So if you're not a person who owes the income tax, you don't owe gift tax, you don't owe estate tax, you don't owe any tax on your gambling winnings and so forth. Having mentioned gambling, I do want to say that the tax upon alcohol is completely legitimate. So I want to be clear about that. So yeah, I'd like to see not only people educate themselves. One way to do that is income tax shattering the myths, but I would like to see them become their own energetic person who feels they need to get the message out. I think the vast majority of people, they take the message in and they feel good about that, and they should, right? Okay, I know the truth now. My mindset is different. I see things more clearly. I don't cotton to this and that I perhaps used to. I think all of that is laudable. The problem is people say, I'm good because I know that, because my mindset has changed. I'm good. Oh, how does that help us change our community? People need to become activists. And if every single person who watched what you do, or every single person who read Income Tax Shattering the Myths, or read Body Science, or whatever they're consuming, if they became activists, I'd like to see, I'm not going to predict what would happen, but I sure like to see what would happen. Unfortunately, most people, they just take in the information and then they feel they're good with that. And that's a shame.
That is a shame. You know, education is where it is, and that is the key to all of this, you know. Unfortunately, it does take reading a couple books. You know, I've seen a couple comments come through that, oh, we just need to read the book. Well, to get any information, you got to consume something, whether it's media, it's going to be media of one form or another, whether it's written word or a video or, you know. So I'm not seeing any more questions for you, Dave. So people, we've got your website here on the thing below for anybody to find your books. Is there anywhere else people can find you and learn more about anything that you're doing?
Sure. Probably my biggest presence is on Facebook. I have a professional page, which is Dr. Reality Dave Champion. And I have almost 150,000 people following me there. And I do a lot of topical videos. And I've been doing videos like crazy, considering the COVID-19 and the incredibly bad data that the governors are working from, and the legal landscape and the physiological landscape and science and facts. So if people are interested in that and they're on Facebook, they can simply look for Dr. Reality Dave Champion and follow me there. If you're a YouTube person, if you don't like Facebook and you're a YouTube person, there is a YouTube channel that by the same name, Dr. Reality Dave Champion. Obviously, Facebook gets a lot more commentaries because I do things in writing as well that don't get posted on YouTube. But all of the videos I do get posted on YouTube. So people can follow my work. And one of the things I pride myself on, I should probably tell the audience this, is facts. Every single viewpoint that we have, in my opinion, should be informed by fact. And one of the biggest problems I see with our culture right now, with our country right now, is that people, they hold opinions without doing a shred of research. And it's not just that they hold an opinion out of ignorance. If I can go a step further, in many cases, they are blatantly arrogant about their ignorance. And that is such a large percentage of the population, I believe, at this point in our country's history. It's hard to know where to go with that. I have people who follow the Dr. Reality page on Facebook and YouTube who say, I no longer tune into the dominant media because, Dave, you're the only person I know that uses facts, rational thought, logic, science, and breaks it all down and presents it without a biased viewpoint. In other words, I don't start with a viewpoint and then use confirmation bias to build the argument. I start in a neutral position and I bring all of the data that I can possibly find together, and I let the data, I let the science, I let the facts inform me of what position I hold, and then I share that with my audience.
Very good. Well, we look forward to hearing more from you. And it was great to get to know you and hear everything that you have to say about the IRS tax code.
Thank you, Dre. I appreciate you having me today.
Absolutely. All right, guys, we're going to take a quick break. Meet us back here at the top of the hour with Zoltan Istvan, transhumanist. I'll be back here with you soon.